Did you know that Spring has a built-in caching mechanism that allows you to reuse an already started application context for testing purposes? So most developers don't, and their builds pay the price. Today I would like to show you the Spring test profiler that unlocks one of the most hidden gems when it comes to testing Spring Boot applications to let you achieve faster builds. So let's take a look at the problem Spring developers have if they are not aware of this context caching mechanism. So on the left side, you see a graph of the build time that scales linearly with the amount of integration test classes. So with each new integration test that gets added to the project, the build time linearly increases up until a point where the team decides we have to do something, and they either parallelize the test suite or they take a look on how to reduce it. On the right side, you see the same team, but now utilizing context caching. So here we can see that we logarithmically increase the build time slightly by adding new integration tests, because with the context caching, we can reuse an already started application context, and subsequent tests become super fast because they don't have to start their own context. So all of this is built into Spring, can be used from day one. You just need to be aware how this feature works and how to make the most of it. So the problem in general with slow Spring test suites is that most of the integration tests start their own context. So this context startup is quite expensive depending on the size and the maturity of your project. This can take between 30 to 60 seconds for large-scale Spring Boot applications. When you're not aware how this caching feature works, even the slight change in your context setup for your integration test results in a new duplicate, which you could avoid if you would be fully aware how this feature is working. With Spring, there is some visibility to understand how this feature works. There's a lock that you can activate to trace that will show you the context caching statistics, but there is no verbose output that will tell you why a specific test class could not reuse an already started application context. And to make things worse, there's also this annotation at dirty's context that if used too much, will be no choice for Spring to reuse an application context, because what this annotation will tell Spring, after your test completes, your application context should be shut down and removed and shouldn't be considered for further caching. So to help developers make the most of this feature, we have developed the Spring Test Profiler, which is an open source project that currently works with Spring Framework 5, 6, and 7. So this covers the broad range of Spring Boot versions that are currently used out there. And there's almost nothing required to set it up. So the setup comes with 3 easy steps. So first of all, you have to include the test dependency. If you're working with Gradle, the import looks slightly different. What's next is you have to register some technical files that have to be picked up automatically by Spring. So therefore, you need to either create or adjust your current meta-inf spring.factories file and add 2 classes to this file. And what's left is to run your entire test suite. And what you will get as an output is a nice looking HTML report that will show you how good you're doing when it comes to context cache reuse, and will also show you potential optimizations for you to even cut down your build times even further. So when running this for the first time, you will get a report that looks similar to this. At the top, you will get some high-level input about how big your context cache was at the end of running your test. You will see how many cache hits you got. Cache hits meaning Spring could reuse in context and the subsequent test was super fast. You will see how many misses you got. So each cache miss results in a new context that needs to be started. You will see a cache hit rate. You will see the total runtime of your entire test suite, as well as how long it took to start all your contexts, as well as early static optimization potential that you could save if you could optimize your application context setup. So in this example, we could improve or reduce the build time by 21 seconds for this sample project. But this is just the high-level input. If we scroll down, we get like an X-ray on how the context cache looked after our test completed. So first of all, we could search for a specific test to understand on which context it was executed. But we can also scroll down and see a list of all the contexts we had in the cache after our test suite completes. So first of all, we separate by either big integration tests that start the entire application context with @Spring Boot test, or also slice tests are rendered here. You will see how many beans were inside your application context, how long it took to load the application context. So you can also then sort by the slowest context start. And in this example, we have a context start of almost 7 seconds. We will see for each context the test that was executed on it. So if there's just one test, there is a potential for optimization because there was no reuse. Down here, we see the first context where at least 3 tests were executed and all of the other contexts. One of the biggest features that will help you to make the most of context caching is this Spring context comparison, because this will now compare 2 application contexts with each other to understand what their difference was. So this example here compares context 0 with context 1. We will see in this example, it doesn't make much sense because on the left side, this is a web MVC test. You see here only 126 beans. On the right side, it's a broader application context. So here it doesn't make sense to compare because aligning these 2 contexts is not possible. But if we take a look at 2 other contexts, we will then see all of the customization points that the context caching framework takes a look at to identify the uniqueness of a context setup. And if the context setup is exactly the same, only then will Spring be able to reuse the application context. And we can now click through the red circles to understand where we drifted off, or where the context on the left side was different to the context on the right side, to then either optimize our context setup or create a shared profile or a shared class. And a classic example is we take a look at the active profiles. So if there's context A activating 2 profiles, test and integration, and context B is only activating context the profile test, there is no reuse possible because each difference in one of these circles results in a new context configuration. And if there is no context configuration for this particular setup in the cache, Spring will give you a new one. So that's the Spring Test Profiler. You can give it a try for your project. So installing it just takes 30 seconds. Keep in mind, you will need to add the dependency to your project. You will need to register 2 beans inside the spring.factories file. Next comes running your entire test suite. And at the end, open the generated report within Target Spring Test Profiler. For Gradle projects, it will be in the build folder. And what's left is for you to identify your potential optimization when it comes to context cache reuse, so that you have fast builds and can make your team much more productive.